The clips from trailers, movies, and other YouTube videos are for educational use only. Enjoy our video podcast.
In project management, there are multiple phases within a project that we've discussed all throughout this channel and in the various different videos. However, one of the most important phases of project management is the planning phase. Now, you may be asking yourself, okay, so I think we've talked about planning before, but let's reiterate it again. Project planning is a crucial part of project management that focuses on creating detailed plans that outline the steps and resources necessary to achieve the project objectives, or also known as the business value. Remember, business value achievement is key to project management. And as we see in the PMBOK, all the processes from integration management to stakeholder management touch the planning phase because it is so essential to prepare all your processes and procedures for your project in order to ensure success. Now, of course, we're not going to touch on how agile works or how a hybrid project would work or even how the predictive or traditional project management will work. All we're talking about today is that project planning is a tool that can be used very strategically for project managers. Now, the problem with planning as a concept and the real world of project management is that planning is not viewed as a way to be strategic. As I've just mentioned, it is something that a project manager can use as a strategic tool. However, most times it's not. And the reason being is two things: politics and lack of discipline. Politics do play a real big role in that because it makes people think about, oh, well, I'm more concerned about getting my promotion, so I'm going to do whatever it takes to make someone, like me enough to be like, oh yeah, let's promote them. But in reality, it's not even in the best interest of the project. And the other piece of that is the lack of discipline, which planning a lot of people don't like. I mean, we don't even like to plan in our own lives, right? We tend to want to be like, let's just do it and get it done. But that's not going to work, especially when you're trying to achieve an overall business value or a real objective or goal, right? So when, New Year comes and everyone's like, oh, I gotta come up with a New Year's resolution. Well, most times people don't plan how they're going to not only attempt to achieve it, but then maintain it. Right. And that's why gyms see a lot of people, come during, the months of January and maybe into February. But then afterwards, it all dies down because, people do not follow through, which is also the whole point of planning. But what people don't realize is that strategic planning is something that is done even outside of project management. And that can happen in marketing departments where they need to determine how they're going to market, who they're going to market, who's the target audience, how much they're going to spend. Same thing with the military. The military has to determine who goes where, when, how, why, what resources. Do they need protection? Do they need certain things? And so, with this video podcast, we are going to talk about the benefits of strategic planning, which are the ability to address issues in a timely manner, ability to identify the majority of needs earlier rather than later, and the ability to persuade and influence people more effectively. Our first benefit of strategic planning is the ability to address issues in a timely manner. Now, when I say this, yes, I know, and any project management professional knows, that you can't have all issues resolved or all issues already understood and all that. But part of planning is to be prepared for any issues that were to arise out of a certain situation. That's why in risk management, it's very important to identify as many risks as possible. Because if you don't, and you didn't prepare accordingly, you end up in bad situations. And this is where we see the difference between a well-planned out project versus a poorly planned out project. And one of these examples of where it was obvious there was not a whole lot of planning done is Chernobyl. Now, I know we talked about Chernobyl from a risk management perspective, but even from a planning perspective, you can tell that those that built Chernobyl made it happen, set it up the way they did, and then of course the processes and procedures that we talked about in the risk management part of that were obviously not established very well in a way that if something were to happen, they had protocols to prevent what had occurred. But obviously, they did not. And that, of course, is a really big issue because when you don't plan things accordingly, you can't address issues. It's the same as if you don't plan your risks out accordingly, you will have problems and be sending out fires instead of actually focusing what's more important as a project manager, such as stakeholder management, stakeholder engagement, communication, which of course leads into our second point of the benefits of strategic planning. The second benefit of strategic planning is the ability to identify the majority of needs earlier rather than later. See, as part of planning, we understand that we have to identify all of our scope, our cost, our schedule, resources, etc. But in addition, it's all part of that need where it's essential because it allows the project team to make decisions and plan accordingly based upon those needs when they're executing the project. And additionally, when the majority of the needs have been identified early, it makes it easier for the project team to readjust as necessary, especially if, heaven forbid, an unknown risk suddenly comes to fruition. They're able to readjust. Whereas if they hadn't, then they would have a lot more issues on top of the fact that then an unknown adds to the pile or to the fires that the project manager then has to address. And we see this with how Oppenheimer acts within his role, which we talked about in a different video, where he was able to identify various things that was needed for the Manhattan Project to be successful. And that included the types of scientists who, in terms of their fields, were the best fit for the job, the resources to make the atomic bomb, and even the Los Alamos location in order to ensure that not only would there be no surveillance by the Nazis of Germany, and even to avoid interruption from the public. Because after all, the Manhattan Project was not very known by the public. It was very hush-hush. But see, even Oppenheimer knew that he had to identify all his needs in the first place, or not all of his needs, but the majority of his needs early. Because then, all throughout the Manhattan Project, in addition to identifying all that, he was then able to adjust as necessary based upon the changes that came forth within the project. Like, again, for example, when one of them wanted to look at hydrogen versus atomic, he was able to readjust the roles of the people on the project and allow that one particular scientist to focus on hydrogen. And that, of course, leads into our final point of the benefits of strategic planning. The third and final point of the benefits of strategic planning is the ability to persuade and influence people more effectively. So see, why we had to bring the first two up is that in order to persuade and even influence people to agree with you, fall in line with you, understand what the business value is of the project, you had to address the issues in a timely manner when they do occur and rise, and you have to identify the majority of the needs earlier rather than later. And see, with planning, this helps bring also structure, which thus, again, continues to persuade and influence people, again, into falling in line with your project. If you don't take the time to plan everything out or present the information to those that work for you on your project or even your stakeholders, you're really not going to get very far, nor probably successful in your project in the first place. And this is especially helpful when weaknesses are identified and need to be addressed quickly, which, as we said, when you have the ability to address issues in a timely manner, you're then able to identify also weaknesses that you could prevent from becoming issues as well. Now, of course, again, we have to always remember you can't identify all your needs, you can't identify all your strengths and all your weaknesses, etc. But by doing the preemptive work, or the big heavy lift as it's called in the beginning rather than during, is a lot more helpful to you as a PM and to your teams and to even your stakeholders. But of course, if you want to have your team or stakeholders be able to buy in, you have to also persuade them and even influence them to think in line with what you, the PM, are proposing to do for the project to achieve the business value. And 12 Angry Men demonstrates the art of persuasion by utilizing evidence as the basis of inferring conclusions that should have been made during the initial trial and not reaching to the point of where then it has to be more thoroughly discussed amongst the jurors. But again, we saw that the juror who disagreed, he still took the time to say, look, here's all the evidence. Here's all the information we have. Does this really make sense? Is this really going to make a difference? Is this really something that we should hold someone to? And he did that with the knife, again, as mentioned in the previous video, and also with the old man who thought he saw the kid running down the hall 15 seconds later after the body hits the floor. And again, at the very end, he's able to convince his fellow jurors to decide the not guilty verdict for the kid. And with that, thank you for joining us on this video podcast, and I hope to see you in the next.